Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about the ALSUP, or the Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems. What is the ALSUP? I like this quote from To Kill a Mockingbird. It's also in this book that is showcased on this page. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into the skin and walk around in it. And that's kind of the basic premise of the work that Dr. Ross Greene does. So the ALSUP, the Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems, was developed by Dr. Ross Greene and shared in his groundbreaking book, Lost at School. If you have not read this book, I highly recommend that you pick up a copy. So the basic premise of Dr. Greene's work is that kids already know how we want them to behave. Kids with emotional, social, and behavioral challenges lack important thinking skills. Kids will do well if they can and if they have the skills. Understanding why a kid has challenging behavior is the first step to help them. Challenging behavior is the result of a lagging or a lacking skill. And when the demands are being placed on a child exceed their capacity to respond adaptively, that's when we see challenging behavior. Dr. Greene's work really challenges us to rethink and reframe how we view students with challenging behavior, rather than thinking about their behavior as manipulative or willful disobedience. We really have to think about it in terms of what skill are they lacking, what skill do they not have, or are they behind in developmentally that is preventing them from behaving in a way that we expect. So the ALSUP, or the Assessment of Lagging Skill and Unsolved Problems, helps identify the lagging or lacking skills that are preventing the child from responding adaptively when demands are placed on them. The lagging skill is linked to an unsolved problem or an expectation that the student is not meeting. So we're going to do a little bit of an ALSUP walkthrough so you can see how this form is completed. It's really meant to be completed as step one for the behavior process that Dr. Greene talks about in his book, Lost at School, called Plan B, but it doesn't necessarily have to be used in that capacity. It's an excellent way to identify skills that a student needs in order to complete certain tasks, and it can be used as a tool in the behavior analysis process. So you can see a little screenshot of the ALSUP over here on the left. And at the end of this presentation, there will be resources so you can click on to get access to this. So basically, there are two terms you kind of need to know. One is lagging skill, and that really means what does the child struggle with? And then the unsolved problems are the expectations that the child is having difficulty meeting. Okay, so now we're going to walk through some, not all, of the lagging skills, and then do a breakdown of what they mean, and then what would the unsolved problem look like. So for this lagging skill, difficulty handling transitions, shifting from one mindset or task to another, this really refers to the shifting cognitive set, which a person needs to move from one task to another or from one environment to another. Each task or environment has different norms and expectations, and shifting your cognitive set helps us switch from one set of norms and expectations to another. So what would the unsolved problem look like in a child that has this difficulty handling transitions? Maybe a student comes back from recess and is unable to settle down to reading time. Maybe they use their outside voice and run around the classroom. The student does not have the skill to shift from one set of norms or expectations to another. So there are a certain set of rules and expectations on the playground that differ from classroom setting. And so when a student has difficulty transitioning back and forth, you'll see them applying one set of rules and norms to a separate location. Okay, here we have two lagging skills: difficulty considering a range of solutions to a problem, difficulty considering the likely outcomes or consequences of one's actions, impulsive behavior. So there are three skills that are really essential to solve problems. First, you have to identify the problem. Then you think of solutions to the problem. And then we anticipate the outcomes of these possible solutions. So what would the unsolved problem look like? Some students are disorganized in their thinking and cannot see the outcomes or even identify the problem. They have so much difficulty working through their thoughts that they become frustrated. This might look like impulsive behavior or becoming easily frustrated when presented with a difficult task. Okay, we have 2 lagging skills here. Difficulty managing emotional response to frustration so as to think rationally. It's called the separation of affect. Chronic irritability and or anxiety significantly impedes their capacity for problem solving. I feel like I have the second lagging skill. Chronic irritability and anxiety severely impacts my ability to work. So separation affect is the ability to separate emotions from thinking, or being able to set your emotions aside to think through a challenge, and that's a developmental skill. Most kids develop that naturally through just their relationships and processes that they go through as they grow up, but some kids do not develop that skill, and it's very difficult for them to separate their emotions from their thinking. So what would the unsolved problem look like? Students who are unable to separate emotions from thinking may struggle with anxiety over simple situations like upcoming tests, social situations, embarrassment. And when we say struggle with anxiety, everybody has a little bit of anxiety, but this would be anxiety to the point of impeding living, sort of. They can have explosive behavior because they're unable to think through what they're feeling. They're not able to separate their emotions and think through the problems that they're facing. So for this one, we have several different lagging skills. Difficulty seeing the grays, concrete, literal, black and white thinking, difficulty deviating from rules and routine, difficulty handling unpredictability, ambiguity, uncertainty, novelty, difficulty shifting from original idea or solution, difficulty adapting to changes in plan, inflexible, inaccurate interpretations, cognitive distortions, or bias. Some students do not develop the ability to think in grays and struggle when presented with a task that requires gray thinking. So what would that look like? What would that unsolved problem look like? Students who are comfortable with factual information but become upset or frustrated when they need to work through a challenge or problem that requires gray thinking. So this might look like difficulty managing change, recess is canceled, or there's changes in schedules. So this lagging skill, or these 2 lagging skills, are difficulty appreciating how one's behavior is affecting other people, difficulty empathizing with others, appreciating another person's perspective or point of view. Some students do not have the ability to see things from someone else's perspective, or how their behavior affects someone else, or how their actions affect other people. So what this unsolved problem might look like is a student not comprehending how their actions affect another person. It might look like taking another student's property, not caring about causing another student physical pain or discomfort. So that walkthrough was pretty quick. If you have questions, you can put it in the chat, or you can reach out to me if you're watching this video at a later date. I would be happy to work through an ALSUP with you on a student. So when you're completing the ALSUP, you really want to go in order. Don't skip around. We want to make sure that we're hitting all those skills and making sure that, does a student really have that skill, or are they lagging in that area? Don't tell stories. Don't tell stories about the student. Well, this one time he came into my room and he was upset, so he threw everything and he broke this favorite lamp of mine. Stories aren't helpful. They're usually tied to the emotion of the person telling the story. They want to bring people into their point of view to see how terrible this kid is. So stories in this aspect, when completing the ALSUP, aren't helpful. And don't hypothesize or theorize why a student does not have the skill, like they have a bad home life, or, understanding the things that a student brings to the table are important, but in this instant, we're not hypothesizing why they don't have that skill. We're really just focusing on the skill they don't have, and then what's the proof, the evidence, the unsolved problem that they don't have it. Again, we're not talking about the student's behavior. We're not telling stories. We're not talking about how upset they get or what their upset looks like when we're completing the ALSUP. That stuff can be very important in the bigger picture of understanding student behavior, but when you're completing this assessment, we keep it very black and white. If any team members feel a student doesn't have a lagging skill, check it off. It's not a democratic process. It's not majority rules. It's a student might show evidence of a lagging skill in one situation or environment that other people do not see. So it's important to take in everyone's account. And I don't know that I mentioned it earlier, but this is a team process. This really should not be completed by one person. It should be completed by a group. Lagging skills are not the primary target for an intervention. The unsolved problems are. So when we say difficulty handling transitions, we're not focusing on his difficulty handling transitions. We're focusing on the specifics of the student comes in from recess and starts yelling. So that's what you're focusing on, that specific unsolved problem. An unsolved problem is the expectation the child is having difficulty meeting. So we expect students to come in and sit down in their seats after recess to begin story time. That student is not able to meet that expectation because when we come in from recess, we know it's a challenge for them because he has difficulty sitting in his seat. And we don't directly reference the behavior that is the result of the unsolved problem. I know I said a minute ago the student was running around. We don't necessarily talk about that. So for example, we're not going to write the unsolved problem at the student screams and swears when struggling with math homework. Instead, we're going to say the student has difficulty completing the word problems on the math homework. The ALSUP really is a tool to use in the variety of information we collect about student behavior. It should not be the end-all be-all, but it really will help us drill down the information, drill down the information that we get on student behavior to what skill do they need. The goal is to think or reframe our thinking around student behavior. All behavior is communication. They're communicating that they don't have the skill to respond to whatever demand is being placed on them. So attached here, there are links to some resources. I am going to try to click on these and see how they pop up. So this is just a guide on how to complete the ALSUP. It really gives you some great tips on what to fill out and what things should and should not contain. I kind of went over that a little bit. This is a little bit more in detail. You can see so here's some examples of how to write an unsolved problem, difficulty getting started on the double-digit division problems in math. They also have down here for home, if you're working with a parent on some of the things that they're struggling at home with. So this resource is the meeting checklist. This is kind of like if you are going to use the ALSUP in a meeting, you can evaluate how it's going. If it's a tool that you are going to consistently use on your MTSS teams, or when you're working with teachers who are, you get an M team together because you've got a kid that's struggling with behavior and you want to work through this. It really gives you a nice layout of how to use it and how to use it appropriately to identify lagging skills. This is the updated of the ALSUP. For 2020, this was updated recently. So up here, you would enter the child's information and the date that you're completing it. And here's where you would check off, difficulty maintaining focus. And then down here, we'd write, whatever the unsolved problem is as it relates to the difficulty to maintaining focus. And then we'd go to the next one, difficulty handling transitions, shifting from one mindset or task to another. And then down here, we would identify what does shifting mindset or difficulty shifting mindset look like for this particular student. And the last link takes you directly to Lives in the Balance, which is Dr. Ross Greene's non-for-profit that focuses on this stuff. You can learn more about his advocacy. You can learn more about his books. He's got some great videos on there. It's an opportunity to really learn from somebody who's considered a pioneer in this area of changing the way we think about student behavior.